I think that you cannot have curiosity without active listening. You can't. It doesn't exist. Curiosity must exist with active listening. So it's one thing to ask the question, but if you're asking the question to simply get a quick answer so you can answer that or get on to the next thing you want to talk about, that's not active listening. Active listening is, tell me more. I love what you just said. Would you mind going a little deeper there? You know what? I had an experience like that as well. Can I share that with you? When you are listening, you are asking, but then you are open to what you hear, and then you go deeper from there.
Hey, this is Brandon Smith. I am your host this week on the Leadership Foundry Podcast. I'm excited to be joined with my business partner and colleague, Randy Hain. So, of course, if you've been listening to the Leadership Foundry Podcast, you know Randy and I are partners, and we've been on the show multiple times to talk about different topics. Today's topic is the life superpower. If you master this topic, you're going to be great, not only professionally and in your careers, but personally. I guarantee you success in whatever way you define it. I know it's a big, bold statement, but our topic today, the superpower today, is curiosity. It's simple. Most people don't use it and don't practice it. But if you master it, it will unlock so many things. So listen real closely to our conversation, and particularly Randy's tips on how he became really, really strong at using curiosity and some of the practical ways you can get better at curiosity. I really loved this conversation. Stay tuned to the very end. I'll share my notes. And the goal with all these is for you to come away with one takeaway that's going to help you become a better leader starting tomorrow.
Welding together practical insights and powerful conversations to forge world-class leaders. This is the Leadership Foundry Podcast.
Randy, my friend, good to see you again.
Good to see you as well. Always a pleasure.
I know we normally see each other quite a bit, but the last few weeks, I know we've both been running pretty hot and heavy. So it's good to actually be in your presence again, even if it's virtual.
Well, it's funny because there are weeks when we're doing team sessions together, and I feel like every single day you and I are like hanging out together. And then we'll go weeks and we're just kind of doing our coaching thing. But I always enjoy our podcast time together.
Yeah, I'm excited for it. So for our Leadership Foundry podcast conversation today, you and I are going to talk about curiosity. And I know it's a concept and a skill set that you and I are both really passionate about. In fact, you dedicated a chapter to it in your book, Essential Wisdom.
Yes.
So let's just dive into it a little bit. I mean, there's so many ways we can take curiosity, lots of different paths. So I'm going to kind of start by being curious and asking you, when you think about curiosity, why is it so important today? Let's start with that first. Let's start with the importance of it, and then we can pivot into how we do it better and what happens if we don't.
Yeah, I think I go back to my parents, who were both so awesome at asking great questions. And they instilled in me not only how to do it, but also a love of it and a love of doing it. So they kind of taught me at an early age, it's good to ask questions, get to know people. So I kind of had that upbringing, and that really served me well. As I got older, I recognized that, I'm a bit more introverted than you. And I found that by asking good questions and being proactive and engaging was a great way for me to feel more comfortable in conversation. And then I kind of think about where I'm at today, and this is probably more relevant to your question. I think that we have a tendency in today's age to talk at each other. I'm not sure we really take the time to get to know each other and really understand, what makes you tick, where you're from, what's life like outside of work. So I think that curiosity is one of those skill sets that we all need to work on. We all need to develop. And I think if we do it well, it will build better engagement, help us with relationships in a number of different areas. So that's my take.
Yeah, I love that.
When you think about it, how do you look at it?
Well, I think it's a superpower anyone can develop. And it is so shocking to me. I'm going to ask you about this in a minute, but it's shocking to me how few people actually do it.
Yes.
I mean, because when you do it well, first, there's several things that you get out of it. When you do it well, from a practical standpoint, it prevents all guessing. The more
Yes.
curious you are with a client that you're working with or a business that you're working with or whatever it happens to be, a colleague that you're trying to align with, the more curious you are, the more you're going to really figure out what they really need. And then rather than you guessing and guessing wrong and someone getting upset, you know exactly what they want. You got the target to the bullseye and you hit it and they say, oh my gosh, that was amazing. Well, yeah, because you told me exactly what you wanted because I asked the right questions. So it really makes things efficient and effective. So it just makes life so much practically so much easier. So that's the first part, just in terms of getting stuff done. Mm-hmm. But the second thing is then along the way, people say, wow, you know, you actually asked me questions. You actually care about me.
Yes.
And you end up building this relationship where people feel cared for. And we can talk a little bit more about that later. And that story that I learned in my own career about empathy and curiosity being the same thing, but you build that relationship. So it feels like a win-win for me. You get things done better and more efficiently and effectively. You meet other people's needs, exactly what they want, and you build a relationship along the way. So it almost leaves me scratching my head. But why wouldn't everyone do this all the time? And yet we don't.
It's interesting to me that I think younger generations often get a bad rap on curiosity. I think people always assume, it's the young people don't ask enough questions. I think it's every generation. I think everybody struggles in this area. And there is a tendency, especially when I meet new people, for them to feel the need to kind of regurgitate their resume and talk at me. And then there's this awkward silence. And I guess I'm supposed to respond to what you've shared with me, never thinking that it might be a good idea to maybe ask me a few questions and I in turn could ask you a few questions. So I do think it's an issue, it's a pervasive problem. But when you do it and you do it well, as you said so well, I mean, it unlocks so many great things. One of the things I find very interesting, it's almost like a default that people believe that they need to over-prepare and be ready for anything that could happen. So they do all this research, they get ready for a meeting, and they're just ready with what they know about you or your company or whatever. They never think to actually prepare great questions. Like if I were meeting you and didn't know you very well, I would think about 3 things I wanted to ask Brandon Smith. I wouldn't come in and regurgitate to you your background.
Yeah.
I wouldn't come in and tell you all about you. I'd come in and ask you to tell me about you. Because to your point, when you put things on the table, I may find a few nuggets that I find interesting or that I connect with, and then I can comment on that and let you know that I heard you and that I get you, and then we have things in common. And that's one of the powerful things about curiosity that we often overlook.
So hearing you talk, it struck me, one of the reasons why I think most people don't do it is that when you're curious initially, it can feel like you're being vulnerable.
Yes.
Like, I'm supposed to come in with all the answers. I'm supposed to come in prepared. I'm going into the meeting. I should have done all the research. You tell that great story of you earlier in your career when you were at Bell Oaks, and your colleague that went in with all the notes prepared, hours and hours and hours, and you came in with the great questions, and it was the great questions that won the day. But it can feel like if I ask that question, what are they going to? They're going to think I don't know anything. They're going to think I'm not prepared. They're going to think I don't have the answers. And yet it's the questions that really show the grounded confidence and the humility and the openness, which we want. So, but yeah. It's getting comfortable with it. Now, I'm not here to say, I'm so confident that I don't feel vulnerable, but I've recognized there's power in being the one asking the questions, and it helps guide the conversation, and I love the ability to be able to help get to an answer with someone I'm working with quicker that way.
Well, yeah, and just to take your point a little further, I totally agree. I think I look at Q&A, like asking questions, and then the answer I get, that answer that I receive is like a gift that keeps on giving, because you're going deeper and deeper and deeper. So maybe my first question was, what's the culture like of your organization? And you may give me a really specific answer. Then I can follow up with an even deeper question. Tell me a little bit more about that. When you say this, give me an example of someone on your team. And we're 5 minutes in, and you have just completely unpacked for me what it takes to be successful in your company. And if I'm a consultant, a coach, whatever it is, I have just learned so many interesting things about you. But if I came in and said, I did some research and it looks like your culture is A, B, C, and D, is that accurate? Well, I basically told you, well, I think I know all the answers. Can you just validate that I know the answer? Instead of doing what I just said and what you talked about, which is asking the question and going deeper and deeper and deeper. I don't know about you, but I've used this illustration with clients, and I think you and I have talked about it before. To me, asking questions is like the great unpacking. If I ask, you're going to put on the table the answer. And after a while, there's all this great information on the table. And then after a little bit, when I'm ready and I've heard enough and I've really listened to you, I can go in and cherry pick and talk about some of the things that you've put on the table and then give you an informed answer. Hey, Brandon, thanks for sharing all that. Here's some things that I heard you say. And I can just take the data that you've given me, the bits of information, and then I can come back to you with a very informed and tailored answer. And that's another thing that we often miss about curiosity. We think we have to know it all when we don't. We just have to ask the questions that unlock the answers.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. And I want to draw attention so all the listeners heard something or saw something very subtle that you did, but it is the secret to curiosity. Curiosity is not the first question you ask. It's the second and third and fourth. So for example, imagine, being an interviewer. You can write 5 questions. I'm going to interview this candidate on these 5 questions. And then they answer the question and then you go, thank you. Question number 2, da-da-da-da-da. That's not being curious.
Right.
Curiosity is, interesting, you said this about that time you worked at this place. I'm curious. Tell me a little bit more about this particular experience in that time. It's the second question. So the example I always say you've heard me say this when I'm doing sessions, I'll say, everyone here right now who's listening to this right now has a vacation spot that maybe they couldn't go to the last couple of years. They really wanted to, and they can't wait to go. So naturally, I could ask the question of, hey, what's that one place you want to go to on vacation? I'm not being curious at this moment. You're going to give me an answer. I'm not curious yet because now I have a decision point to make. On the one hand, I can use the worst phrase in the modern American language, which is good for you, which I absolutely hate that phrase. So, you tell me, I want to go to, Bali. And I say, good for you, Randy. And good for you really means, well, that sounds interesting. You seem to care about that. I could care less. Let's talk about something I want to talk about. Or I could say, well, tell me about Bali. Why do you want to go there? Like, who would go with you? And have you been there before? Do you think I would like it? Is there a particular experience there you're most excited about? I mean, there's so many ways to get curious about that. And I think we often think it's the first question, but that first question just starts to open the package. Let's dig deeper. And as you said, kind of find really where there's either a lot of energy or where there might be the right answer. And so you did that so masterfully there, so subtly. I want to draw attention that that's what it's really about. So be willing to explore based on whatever the person gives you as an answer.
I totally agree. And it's really interesting that we're talking all around it, but I want to get your take on this. I'll give you a perspective and I want to hear you kind of expand on this. I think that you cannot have curiosity without active listening. You can't. It doesn't exist. Curiosity must exist with active listening. So it's one thing to ask the question, but if you're asking the question to simply get a quick answer so you can answer that or get on to the next thing you want to talk about, that's not active listening. Active listening is, tell me more. I love what you just said. Would you mind going a little deeper there? You know what? I had an experience like that as well. Can I share that with you? When you are listening, you are asking, but then you are open to what you hear, and then you go deeper from there. And that could really lead to something very magical. But I think that you can't have good curiosity without active listening. What's your take?
Agree with you 100%. So just for folks listening, because some may say, I know exactly what active listening means. Others might say, I'm not sure exactly what those two guys mean by active listening. When I think about active listening, I think about 2 things. One, it can be just paraphrasing back to what you heard. So, I heard you say that your favorite experience this past year was this thing. Wow, that's excellent, amazing. I'd like to talk about that a little bit more. Or it could be taking something that they said and then asking for more clarifying around that, digging deeper around something. Randy, I know you had this experience when you were at Bell Oaks, and I know that it was really transformational for you. You just mentioned that. Why was it transformational? Say a little bit more about that. So it's kind of taking that thing and going a little deeper. So it can be paraphrasing to really show you're engaged in listening and building off that, or it can be asking that clarifying question. But I think that's active listening is just not nodding one's head. It's actually engaging back on what you just heard. It's that building process.
One thing that might be interesting, Brandon, for us to talk about is, so we've named listening, active listening, as a companion that must exist with curiosity. What are some of the other, tools and sort of things that need to exist for curiosity to thrive? I've got some ideas, but when you think about elements of curiosity, things that will help it really, really thrive, what would be on a short list for you?
So that's a really good question, Randy. I'm going to start from a personal standpoint. I think that people have to be willing to embrace the curiosity and be excited about what they're going to find. So rather than come into and say, I have the answer, say the answer exists in this conversation. This is going to be a fun conversation where we're going to discover it together. And you and I do that with clients all the time. We get a brand new client and it's all about identifying where their needs are so we can find a solution that's going to meet that need. And it's just a back and forth with asking questions and kind of getting curious. So I think it's looking at the conversation rather than a judgment or under pressure to say this is going to be a kind of a fun exploration for us. And so just getting comfortable with that, not going into things without having the answer, but having some good questions that will help you discover it. So that would be one I would throw out. What might be one you'd want to add to the list, Randy?
I love that one. I've always kind of described that as expect surprises. I go into every conversation, quite frankly, not knowing where it's going to go. And I'm completely comfortable with that. Now, you and I both know what I just said makes some people cringe. You mean you don't know where the meeting's going? You don't know where the conversation's going to go? No, and I don't care, because I have faith and confidence that if I ask good questions, we'll have the right conversation. But I think expecting surprises is really what makes it fun. I think the other element, though, that's very close to that is being genuinely interested in learning something new.
Oh, yeah.
Listen, I'm in a place in my life where I know what I know, but I also know there's plenty to learn. And I'm always interested in people's backgrounds, experiences, learning something new about business or leadership. I'm hungry for that. So I love the opportunity to learn new things. And I think the other thing that makes curiosity thrive is when we suspend judgment. I think we've become so polarized today. And we kind of prejudge people into a corner. Looking at your LinkedIn profile, you must be this way, or you must believe that, or you belong to that organization. I think if you want curiosity to thrive, you have to kind of jump in and say, you know what? I don't really care about any of that. Let's just be good human beings and connect and relate to each other. So I think suspending judgment, which has become more and more of an issue these days. Those are some other things I would add.
Yeah, I love those three. Expect surprises, genuinely interested, and suspend judgment. The last two, the generally interested and suspend judgment, I think are so important because the other party feels it.
Yes.
They know if you're genuinely interested in them and what they have to share, or just them. And they know when they're being judged.
Yes.
And how many managers and leaders have we worked with where this is a major issue for them? Because in an effort to be efficient, they just assume quickly what's going on, or assume a mistake that their direct report's making, or just assume and then jump in and just give directives rather than this exploration. So they lack that. So they miss out on the opportunity to build a connection with their team. They miss out on the opportunity to coach. And they miss out on the opportunity to, discover new ideas and new solutions to problems. So I think we can see it all play out in that way. So I want to pivot a little bit here. Sure. And I've actually got so many questions I want to ask you, Randy. So I'm choosing in my mind which one I want to do. I think I'm going to start with pivoting outside the professional world into the personal world.
Okay.
So how does curiosity help us build relationships to the people in our life we care about?
Well, I think you alluded to it earlier. When you ask questions of other people, you are signaling to them that they're interesting, that you care about them. It's a form of empathy. I want to know more about you. Tell me more about you. Tell me what's going on in your world. I care about you enough to ask you questions. So I think immediately by demonstrating curiosity, now this probably doesn't work with our kids sometimes because they get a little sick of it. That's another story. But I do think that as we're, building relationships and hanging out with our friends. I was at a breakfast meeting this morning with some guys from my men's group. And we had a really good banter that was us asking each other questions and putting things on the table and just kind of catching up on each other's world. And it was fun and comfortable, but we all kind of were able to learn where each of us was at this moment in time. So I think just asking questions is a great way to signal, I'm not here, just because I'm supposed to be here because it's a check the box. I want to be with you in this moment because I want to know what's going on with you. And I love this quote from Thoreau, and I'm going to paraphrase it. I may not get it exactly right. The greatest compliment that was ever paid to me was when someone asked me a question and attended to my answer. And I love that because when you ask questions and you really want to know the answer, people, to your point, know. They know that you really want to know. So I think when you think about relationships and family, work, whatever, you're signaling, I want to know a little bit more. I care about you, and I want us to kind of live in this moment where you're answering my questions and telling me about your life. So that's probably how I'd respond to that.
Yeah, I love that, Randy. I agree with you 100%. And I frankly think you and I'm going to be very directive about this and not say I'm going to move it almost towards fact, although it's still my belief that you can't have intimacy without curiosity.
Totally agree.
Period. You cannot have intimacy without curiosity. If you're not willing to be curious about the other person, now they have a part they have to play. They have to be willing to respond in an authentic, vulnerable way. If they don't give you any kind of response, then you're really not going anywhere with developing that relationship. But as long as they respond back in an authentic, vulnerable way and then turn back to you and get curious about you, that's where we develop intimacy in life. And intimacy can take lots of forms. Intimacy can be professional intimacy. We build those relationships with clients that's just trusting. And we know all about their motives and their needs and goals, and we help them achieve those. Or colleagues, but we also develop intimacy in our personal life with friends and community leaders and significant others. And it's all about the willingness to be curious. The saddest thing I see when Emily and I go on date nights is we'll go out to a restaurant and we'll see a couple just sit across from each other the entire meal, not say a word.
Or looking at their phones.
You look at their phones, or they'll just kind of look at the menu, or they'll kind of look around, and you can see one of them wants to talk, but was waiting for the other one to start the conversation, and neither of them talk. And these might be couples that look like they've been together 40 years, and you think to yourself, wow, what a missed opportunity. What a missed opportunity to discover and learn what's going on in that person's life, particularly if there's someone that is meaningful to you. And because something might have changed in the last week that was an aha for them or something they want to talk about. But instead, they just order the appetizer, order the salad, order the entree, look at their clock, look at their watches, get up and
Where's
go.
the check?
Where's the check? Yeah. The only person they talk to is the wait staff, and they pretty much just ask for the check. That's about it.
But something that, this element of our dialogue is pointing to, is I find, I don't know if you agree, but I find that people often get stuck on language. Well, okay, Randy, Brandon, I get this idea of curiosity, but sometimes I don't know what to say. I don't know the right questions to ask. And I find this across all generations. People just get kind of stuck on what to ask, or they're really comfortable with some basic questions that are actually not helpful to unlock curiosity. Here's an example. Brandon, you doing okay? How's your day? What's going on?
Fine.
Fine. When we ask questions that close the aperture and we get a yes or no response, we have just murdered curiosity. Instead, Brandon, it is a beautiful day outside. I don't know about you, but as soon as we're done, I'm going to go take a hike with my younger son. Are you doing anything fun the rest of the day or this weekend? What's on your agenda? Yeah. There is no way you can give me a yes or no. You're going to give me a little bit of insight about what's going on. So we want to ask questions that open the aperture, that create a dialogue. So one of the most common things that you and I see in business is when leaders are trying to, get feedback or talk to their teams or talk to their, and do one-on-ones, they often ask these basic questions that get a yes or no. You guys doing okay? Everything all right? How was your quarter? And we get yes, 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 fine. And what we're constantly coaching our clients and our coaching clients and teams to do is start asking questions that will create a dialogue.
Yeah.
Start asking things that will open that aperture.
I love that, Randy. So I'm going to build on it and add a couple of my favorite questions that I like to ask in the professional setting.
Yes.
I ask this with coaching clients. I ask this with new clients that maybe ask us to engage with them on Leadership Foundry projects when they're thinking about bringing in cohorts of leaders, and we're kind of helping them design that because we want to make sure we design it just right. We want to design it in a way that's going to meet the needs of the business and meet the needs of those leaders. So 2 questions that I always like to ask in those initial conversations is I bring out my crystal ball and I bring out my magic wand, which makes it a little more fun and inviting. So say if I put my crystal ball in front of you, and other than being invisible, it only shows perfect. And let's say the engagement is done. Okay, we finished the engagement, whatever the engagement might be. And you're looking through the crystal ball and it was exactly what you wanted. What would success look like? What would you want to hear people be saying? What people be feeling, or actions you'd want to see? And that just, first, they always say the same thing. There'll be a couple of people on that call. They always say, "Oh, what a great question," which tells me it's getting them thinking about that. Because after all, you and I want to know what the success is. Mm-hmm. So we know how to hit that bullseye, whether it's a coaching client, a Leadership Foundry engagement, or anything else. Or you're working with an individual. So we want to ask those questions. And the second one I do is I'll say, all right, now, let's say I had my magic wand and I could wave it right now. I'll hand it to you and you could wave it. What's one thing around here right now you would change or fix? One thing. Mm-hmm. And if it's a coaching client, I might say, is this part of your role you change or fix? Is it someone on your team? Is it your leader? What would you change or fix? Magic wand works with anything. What would you wave it and fix? Which also helps us identify that pain point. But mm-hmm. those are fun, inviting, and everyone's going to have an answer to one of those questions, which helps mm-hmm. us know, okay, here's where we need to take our conversations going forward.
I love it. And you're being consistent with the theme of, I want to ask the question, and I love the fun element because I've seen you do it many times and it works very well. But you're also asking them for, what are the key needs? What's going on? Tell us where we need to spend our time today.
Yeah.
Now that's not what you asked, but that's exactly where you land because you asked it in a really interesting way.
Right. And to that point, this is where, as more people practice curiosity, you start to learn. If I ask the person, what do you need? They're not going to be able to answer that question really well, or they're going to confuse wants with needs. Mm-hmm. So that's a deeper question. But if you make it playful and fun and say, crystal ball, magic wand, you're going to get what you need in order to help them. So it's finding those questions that help get everyone more clarity, which I know is a word you're also very passionate about, on where we need to go.
So, it's interesting, and we didn't use this illustration or this imagery at the beginning, but it's almost like you and I are trying to bake a curiosity cake today. And our cake has lots of ingredients in it. And there are all these different things we're talking about that will make a really cool curiosity cake. Well, going down this path of questions, I'll tell you some of my favorites, because I think these are other questions that can unlock curiosity and help it work. So I think that vulnerability is a really key ingredient to our cake, our curiosity cake.
Yeah.
So when I want to create some vulnerability and build a deeper connection, I always begin conversations with, new friends, existing clients, anybody with, hey, can we just talk a little bit about life outside of work? Tell me about life outside of work. How are you doing in the non-work area of your life right now? And I shut up. They will give me as much or as little as they're comfortable giving me. But I always get some little nugget. Something's going on. Yeah. Well, we just had a great vacation. Life hasn't been that great lately. My daughter's got COVID. Or, oh my gosh, what a crazy weekend. I had 3 soccer games with my son and a baseball game with my youngest daughter, whatever. So as you ask that question, how's life outside of work, you'll get this really interesting insight into the non-work person. Then you can connect to that. Oh, you know what? My kids play sports, or our weekend was also busy. We went to the same Mexican restaurant you went to. Whatever it is, we can find a way to connect. So asking that question creates a little bit of vulnerability. It's like the wall comes down a little bit. You can also say something like, hey, listen, you guys do anything fun this weekend? Anything interesting? Instead of any plans this weekend? Yes, no. Anything fun or interesting? What are you going to do with your family this weekend? Whatever you can do to get them to open up and then you can respond, that allows you to build a connection. Another element, though, if you're not sure of your audience or if they have a history of not sharing much, you can begin with transparency. Brandon, what are you doing this weekend? I don't know about you, but I have so many yard projects I've got to get done, and then I've got to take my older son hiking and my younger son to baseball practice. It's crazy busy in my house. What are you doing? By being transparent first, I've now given you permission to be transparent and open with me. So I think that using curiosity to really get some vulnerability, because then you're going to have a richer, more honest and authentic conversation. So again, as I think about our curiosity cake, I think vulnerability and these kinds of questions are just other ingredients in that cake.
So I want to build on that, Randy, and then I've got a final question for you.
Sure.
So I love that. And I was thinking to myself, oh gosh, masterclass of curiosity from Randy. I love this. And then I thought, okay, if you're the manager and it's one of your direct reports, you definitely want to be transparent first.
Yes.
Because otherwise they could feel like, particularly if you're a new manager to them, why are they asking me all these questions? It feels like I'm being judged or they're on the offensive. Even if you're coming from a spirit of not judging them, we don't know their history with their prior managers. So leading with some transparency is important. And the one final tip I would give to people here is be really, really careful opening any question with the word why.
Mm-hmm.
Why always implies judgment.
Yes.
Randy, why did you wear a blue checkered shirt today to the podcast? Immediately, Randy's like, I kind of thought I liked the shirt today. I didn't think there was anything wrong with his clean shirt. But immediately it puts him on the defensive. Why implies you're judging someone's thinking. And now people that come from certain backgrounds, if you're kind of IT, engineering, law, you're trained to ask why, because you're trying to get to the root of the issue or core, the root of why the person made that decision. You're trying to learn intent. But it will come across as a judgment. It will shut down curiosity. So when we want to avoid why, and definitely avoid it if you're a manager. Why did you put it together that way? Why did you come up with that number? Why are you recommending that? I mean, that's going to end the conversation. So I want to pivot from there and ask the last question for you, Randy. We talked a lot about our curiosity cake today. Mm-hmm. I hope everyone listening to this says, I want to get better at curiosity. I want to build this muscle, because you and I both believe it's the secret to success in life, personally and professionally. Everything comes from this muscle. Where would you recommend they start?
Well, I think in a self-serving way, chapter 16 in Essential Wisdom, because I think I spent a lot of time in that chapter really going deep into this topic with lots of script ideas. So I wrote extensively on it. I think that would be a great resource. I think you and I both have blogged enough over the years on topics like this and related to this that I think both of us have a rich treasure of work that people could go and explore. But I think if I were listening and I felt like I'm not really good at curiosity, I probably would start with, people that I'm comfortable with. And maybe it's friends, family, maybe it's a close colleague. And I would just be super intentional. Invite them to a cup of coffee, go have lunch, and just sort of really train yourself to go in knowing that I don't know where we're going to go today, but I've got 3 or 4 things that I really would love to ask of this person. Make sure the questions are going to open the aperture, not close it. And I'm going to just trust that we're going to land in a really great place. But I'm going to go with someone that I'm comfortable with, because I like this curiosity thing, but it makes me a little nervous. So I'm going to go to a trusted colleague or friend or family member, and I'm going to go in with some good questions, and then let's just see what happens. And I'm going to build my confidence, and then I'm going to go out and do it again and again and again until I finally feel like, bring it on, I can talk to anybody. That's how I got started as a young man, as a young leader, and it served me very well.
Amen, brother. Fantastic. Randy, great to have you on the Leadership Foundry Podcast. So we get to jam about such an important topic here today. I'm glad we got to have the conversation here. I'll, of course, summarize our notes for folks, so stay tuned, keep listening. But thanks again, my friend, for all the gifts that you gave. And I love that next practical step, in addition to just starting with baby steps. If you haven't already read the amazing book, pick up a copy of Essential Wisdom, Chapter 16. It's all right there. You can go on Amazon and other potential booksellers and look for Randy Hain, Essential Wisdom, Chapter 16. That's a great starting place.
Thank you, my friend. Always a pleasure to spend time with you.
Wasn't that a great conversation? Wasn't that helpful and productive? I sure hope it was for you. Because as I said to set this up, curiosity is your superpower. If you can master it, you're going to be exceptional with your colleagues, with your leader, with your clients, with your significant other, and even with your kiddos. So it's all about getting more comfortable with it. So what are some practical ways that you can start? Well, Randy gave some great questions to ask. He likes to start off with, what's life outside of work? Just getting curious about that question. Maybe even starting going first, sharing what's going on with you. I shared my idea of a crystal ball and magic wand, some things that you can do to start to ask those questions to get a better understanding of others. But at a fundamental level, it's all about being willing to be vulnerable and expecting the surprises that come out of that conversation, showing genuine interest in the other person, and suspending judgment. When we show up that way with our direct reports, with our colleagues, with our leaders, with our significant others, they can feel it, and it just opens up so many great opportunities. So don't be those couples that just sit in the restaurant and stare at each other the whole dinner and not asking a question. Learn how to get more comfortable with questions, and I guarantee you success. But regardless of what we talked about, take away that one thing from the conversation that you want to use starting tomorrow to make you a better leader.